Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac will enact changes to fees known as loan level price adjustments on May 1st that will affect mortgages originating at private banks nationwide, from Wells Fargo to JP Morgan Chase, effectively tweaking interest rates paid by the vast majority of home buyers. Just as an aside, I want to mention that I'm not saying what caused the housing crisis and crash that just ruined the lives of millions and millions, the fortunes, the saved fortunes of millions of white people. But there was a period when the federal government was intimidating and suing, and other anti-white entities intimidating and suing banks into grant and other savings and loans, granting mortgages, making mortgages, loans to people that were too risky, and giving them more than they could ever hope to pay back. You know that happened because there are anti-whites today who will tell you that the banks preceding the mortgage crisis and crash were practicing predatory lending. And that, and the reason why anti-whites will say this is because they say that these awful white bank owners were out there giving loans to non-white people to victimize them and to steal from them. And I had many arguments with anti-whites, with white anti-whites who were making this argument. And I had to point out to every one of these dumb sons of bitches that it's only predatory lending when the person can pay the money back. It's not predatory lending when they can't. It's not. So they're not preying on someone from whom they can get nothing, you jackasses. It's only predatory lending. So there were a lot of loans made to white people, for example, that were predatory in nature. And loans, and what kind of loans were those? Those were loans that were adjustable mortgages from banks. They made to millions of young white couples, not just white people, but it was, we are the biggest clump of the population. It's us that are getting hit with this. And banks made these loans knowing that these interest rates would change dramatically and put these home buyers upside down in their mortgages, because they knew what they were doing to try to survive the anti-whiteism, the anti-white lawsuits, to force them to give loans to people who would never be able to pay it back. And of course, what were the banks doing? They were bundling up all the bad debt and then selling them to white investors, not just white people, but predominantly white people. They were even going to Europe and selling tons of this junk shit to white people. We're talking about white people, not filthy rich or super rich or mega rich, ostentatiously rich, white people who have worked hard and they made good money over the course of their lives, maybe middle class, above middle class, slightly above middle class, and they got enough money to make little investments that they hope will have big yields down the road. And they bought all this shit because their banks, the people they trusted, came to them and they said, hey, look at all these bundles. The people managing their buying and selling of stocks and bonds came to them and said, yeah, you should buy all this stuff. And then it became valueless. So you hurt all those millions of white people. You hurt all the millions of white people that you put in these adjustable rate mortgages when you knew shit was going to hit the fan. You were not targeting and harming non-white people. Yet again, another great example of how white people are harmed, are victimized across Western civilization. Economically in this case, but then also mentally, emotionally, spiritually blamed for harm inflicted on non-white people who had to move into some fucking palace that they could never afford and now have to bitch and moan that they got to live in the ghetto again because they had their palace taken from them. Well, your mortgage payment was more than your fucking check. Maybe that should have been a fucking cue to you. How are you going to pay? I saw interviews with anti-white, non-white people who literally were saying, how's I supposed to know? Your mortgage payment is more than your fucking check. That's how you fucking know. So, what's going to happen here? They're not going to go out and find non-white people to victim. Do you really think a bank? Do you really? I mean, you're going to look me in the eye and tell me that a bank is going to force a non-white person to subsidize the purchase of someone else's house? Are you kidding? They'd be sued instantly, successfully. Oh no, this is only you and me. And do you know what this means? Just like prior to the mortgage crisis and crash, you're going to have all these people buying homes, except this time they'll be able to keep them in your neighborhood. Homes that they would not be able to afford without you subsidizing the purchase of their houses. Don't want to live in the ghetto? Too bad. They're going to move the ghetto to your house. Right to your neighborhood. Right to your block. Don't like Little Tijuana? Too bad. They're going to move it right down the street. The result, according to industry pros, pricier monthly mortgages payments for most homebuyers. An ugly surprise to those who worked for years to build their credit, only to face higher costs than they expected as part of a housing affordability push by the U.S. Federal Housing Finance Agency. Doesn't that just sound like something right out of a goddamn Stephen King novel? Quote, it's going to be a challenge trying to explain to somebody that says, quote, I worked my whole life for high credit and I've put a lot of money down and you're telling me there's a negative now, close quote. That's a hard conversation to have. One worried Arizona-based mortgage loan originator told the Post. Yeah, I guess that is a hard conversation to have, especially now with as high as the housing prices are. Hey, but go out and LARP some more. Go out and put on a skull mask some more, you fucking losers. It's unprecedented, added David Stevens, who served as Federal Housing Administration Commissioner, should say commissar, during the Obama administration. My email is full from mortgage companies. Do you remember that Rahm Emanuel celebrating their video, celebrating and laughing about suing banks out of business for not giving loans to people who could not afford them? Why were they able to be successfully sued out of business? Because there was the moral imperative that those people they weren't giving loans to that couldn't repay them were non-white people. So there was that moral pressure in the courtroom that overrides all law, right? We'll have to find that video. But maybe it's not real. You know, the ear is against the door, so who knows? My email is full from mortgage companies and CEOs telling me how unbelievably shocked they are by this move. Is anybody else talking about this? I mean, this is huge. White home buyers, largely white home buyers, will be financing the purchases of homes by non-white home buyers.